Welcome to another episode of the Zealous Podcast, the show that's all about the pros behind the pros. I'm your host, Rocky Snyder. This week, we head down south to Miami for their football club. We speak to the head of performance and the assistant coach, Ryan Thamm. He's going to tell us all about what he's been doing with his players and how he went from Alaska to Miami. All right, so you are the most unlikely candidate to be a performance coach for a team in Miami because you grew up on the extreme opposite corner of the country, way up north outside Anchorage, Alaska. How did you get to go from there to where you are now? Like, what happened? Did you? I don't see Alaska being a huge popular state for soccer.
Not at all. And it still probably isn't, in all fairness. Football and basketball are massive, and obviously hockey has a huge role within the state. It was something, again, I grew up in a pretty small area as well. Like my high school had, I think, like around 350, 400 kids. I think when I graduated, we were the biggest class at that current time. It's like 70 something that graduated. So like we weren't big, but it provided me an opportunity. I played every sport and I always loved competing and being involved in any game and competition. And my hope was when I was leaving high school was to go play college basketball originally. And so I ended up playing our spring season of soccer to stay in shape. And I had some good friends on the team. And at the time, our baseball program got dropped. So it was just another way to just go out and compete and play in our sport and be with some friends. We were terrible, but I discovered that the sport was actually a lot different than I expected. I remember seeing the World Cup in 2006. And where I grew up too, like, we truly didn't get much television. Like it took us ages to even get like a dish or cable. Like literally just a lot of times it's like, oh yeah, it's like still literally not available in your area. So then all of a sudden I actually see an actual live TV of like, again, soccer outside like a FIFA game. I'm like, oh, like Ronaldinho, like this is actually kind of sick. Like these guys are unbelievable athletes. Because you grow up with that perception, especially in the 2000s for me, it was like they were these soft and all the diving and it was just like, yeah, like football, tough. Like I'm not going to associate with that. So I go to this college in Oregon to get my planning on doing like exercise science and not really knowing what I was going to do, honestly, when it came to my actual thought process past career. It was just like, yeah, you go to college. Like I just want to play sports. I just want to be involved in sports. Like school is honestly an afterthought. And I go there and you're on your own and your first time on your own at 18 and in a different environment. I got really scared. I was planning on trying to be a walk-on. I ended up meeting some soccer guys and some stuff happened. So they had a low roster. It was the second year of their program. It's an NAIA school. And I don't really remember actually, honestly, how it went down. But I know that my friends who I just made talked to their coach who ended up talking to me at a volleyball game and convinced me to come out to a training session the next day. And he offered me a spot on the team. Then they needed players. I was fortunate enough to be athletic, even though I really didn't know anything about the game. And then I ended up discovering how much I love the sport. And over the course of time, I was going to try to do both, but there's always something that kind of kept me from really pursuing basketball, which was kind of like my love at the time. And I just slowly more and more realized how much I wanted to be in soccer. And so by the time I got done to graduate, I was starting to discover, there were actual support staff and people who had these roles like performance coach and performance analyst. And I knew I wasn't probably in a place where I knew the game well enough that I was going to be a actual coach, which that's ultimately kind of at the time where I think I wanted to go down the route of, but I always had a thing for the fitness. I was always the guy who won the fitness tests and prided myself on that. And so I started looking around of like, where could I go find opportunities to learn? And again, it was naive because I really didn't know better, but it was trying to put myself in an environment where I'd be incredibly uncomfortable. And like, I just thought, hey, like if I go to this program in Wales, which seemed too good to be true on paper, and to be fair, it was unbelievable. If I like do okay, I probably have a chance to maybe come back and maybe try to work in the MLS or do something like that. And because ultimately I always want to be in pro sports. So I got accepted into the program and packed a suitcase and moved all the way across the world.
Wow. Now, How many candidates were in this program in South Wales?
I'll be honest, I don't actually remember. It wasn't like in a huge program group. It was still fairly new. They've done some really great things with sport at this university. They have some really great lecturer and people that ran the program at the time. There's a guy who works at the Welsh FA called David Adams, who I remember bombarding with emails not knowing at all who he was. And he's like a guy that does, I think, mentoring and like the UEFA Pro license, and truly incredible. And I had no idea who he was at the time. And, he's answering my emails, and when I get there, he was super welcoming and helped me. He was the one that helped turn me on to the potential internship with Swansea City when I was there as a performance analyst, which got me to apply. And then I ended up getting that role, which helped me really develop more of my knowledge from the actual game standpoint, even though it wasn't necessarily a fitness role, but it was still a step in the door of a professional team, which got me my next opportunity to become an intern with the Timbers, a lot due to that experience. We had lecturers like Ian Jeffries, who's wrote a lot of books on game speed. And he's, again, I had no idea who this guy was because so early on and so young. But, I remember going into his lectures and some practical stuff and being like, this is unbelievable. I still to this day remember stuff and use stuff I learned from him then. And it kind of turned my whole world upside down about how I approach things, how I learned. And it truly was, it really threw me under to, I guess, like really know like this is where I want to be and from a career standpoint.
Well, you went deep too. I mean, South Wales to Swansea City. What was just, you must have been drinking out of a fire hose when it came to having that internship there. What
I was buzzing.
Oh yeah. What was the culture shock like for you? And how accepting were Europeans, especially in the football community in the UK, to an American, especially from Alaska, coming in and trying to take on a spot?
Yeah, what was actually kind of funny was when the people ask me where I'm from, and I've always done this just naturally, I'm from Alaska. Like, some people really don't actually know that's actually part of the States. I had some people like, oh, is that like near Canada? I'm like, yeah, it's close. But it's truly almost as perceived as his own country. And again, maybe I was really lucky being part of like, in Cardiff, and then obviously going over to Swansea, which were nearby. But the Welsh are unbelievably welcoming people. Like, I never had one time where like there's a bad encounter, like, what are you doing here? You're American. Like, you guys don't know anything. It truly, like, even like I remember doing like, they had UEFA courses. So I went through the coursework at UEFA C as part of our program. And, you had people from all over, but again, I was one of the few foreign people, but there was other foreign people from, whether it was other parts of Europe, we had people from North Africa, from the Middle East, from Asia. Like, it was actually a pretty big melting pot, to be honest. And everyone was incredibly welcoming in every way. Like, if you were good at what you are and showed like enthusiasm, because everyone there wanted to learn, there was really no roadblocks, to be honest. From when I got into with Swansea and being fortunate to be my interaction a lot like players and coaching staff was pretty minimal. We were very backroom and kind of off to the side because they were still kind of building that Swansea way at the time, and they were in the Prem at that moment. So I was really just working closely with the analysis staff and my head, the head of analysis, who was kind of Gethin Reese. And so he just, in a way, kind of like protected me and shielded me from things I needed to. I obviously had interactions at times with people, but I was giving him the stuff and he was obviously reporting out, and they were very happy with the work he did. And he's a really knowledgeable guy. And so there's never any coming in like, what is this you guys are giving us? Like, we never had those sort of interactions. It was always really welcoming. They hear where I'm from or listen to the way I talked, and they would always ask and have questions, but it was never like, like, you clearly know nothing. It was never came in that way, which was, again, kind of surprising because I kind of expected it, and a little more harsher critics in a way, but honestly, they were all great.
Well, in some regards, I mean, people might get a little bit hesitant when going into a new sport where they don't know the technical information, right? But we're talking about conditioning bodies, and so it's a little different avenue, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, and
2 arms, I 2 legs.
I was looking from, I guess, and obviously it wasn't in the fitness aspect in that year when I worked with Swansea, but I was lucky again. I had a huge interest, and I'm kind of a person when like I decide I like something and it starts going, it's kind of all or nothing. And I jumped on 2 feet, and that's what I did when I was at university. When I played, and the amount of games I watched Premier League and all that, I remember, and again, like, this was early on, so like NBC Sports wasn't a massive thing yet, so I was finding dodgy sites to try to watch any game and waking up at terrible hours. Like, I had a good knowledge base of the league. It was more I just needed to develop the actual tactical understanding. And again, I was fortunate to be able to learn that there. But I knew also after that year that, well, this was a great skill set to learn, that it wasn't my type to sit behind a computer all day and watch and write reports as much as I like, for instance, right now on the data side and the things we do and utilizing that data to make more informed decisions. I personally need to be on the field and be active and moving and working with players, because that's the thing I love the most.
So you have your foot in the door at British Premier League soccer, which is like the Olympics
pinnacle
of football, right? But you also potentially have an opportunity to go to like Bundesliga or La Liga in Italy or all these other European leagues. And yet what I just heard you say is you came back to the States and you got a position with the Portland Timber, which, hey, that's nothing to knock, because when it comes to like New England Revolution, Portland Timber, Kansas City, those are some of the top-notch MLS teams. So how did that work out? How did you're over in the UK, and then how did that position come about?
Yeah, so it was one of those things, like, I obviously, to be fair, I wanted to stay there. I still wanted to kind of be in Europe, but I was obviously on a student visa, and just like a lot of the people that come from abroad and come to the States, like the visa issues can be difficult. And just at the time, to be fair, I was still finishing up my coursework. So like you have like a year you go through, then you kind of finish up your dissertation and submit it. And again, you're just looking through every site and anything that might come available, right? So like, for instance, like the Teamworks site where they post a lot of things, like I essentially checked that religiously, like sometimes unfortunately twice a day, because it was one of those things of, and maybe it was a fear of missing out, but it was also, I knew I wasn't going to be able to stay on at Swansea because they weren't ready to add a person full time, at least not yet. And also at the same time, like I knew I probably didn't want to stay in kind of the performance analyst field. I knew the coaching aspect was something more I wanted to go into. And I was kind of looking at all the doors and what there was. And then that opportunity, the Timbers came up as a sports science intern with underneath a guy named John Cohn. And I saw it, so I just instantly applied, and he reached back out and I spoke to him, and it was just like, yeah, like it's unpaid, but if you want to come, like basically offered me the opportunity to be there for, I think it was about a 6-month time frame. So kind of somewhere around the middle of summer we started until the end of that year. And
how did you make ends meet if it's an unpaid internship? What did you do on the side?
Yeah, it wasn't easy. And so fortunately, I literally just got done with I was my university, I was done my coursework. So I was literally in the process anyways of planning to move back, because my lease and everything in the student housing is at. So I drove down, I lived in someone's room in a house, I paid cheap. And then I tried to like personal train, and I coach CrossFit and stuff on the side at a local gym. And then I also started working with the academy and kind of started some of the stuff there. And again, it was a good experience for me just to get my foot in the door and coach more. And I was also lucky I was still in that grace period of student loans. And obviously you take off those to where I had some money in that capacity to still help myself float by. And I was also lucky I had very supportive parents, even though they still thought I was probably at the moment pursuing a pipe dream. But when they started seeing I was getting these opportunities, like there was one internship and also there's another, it started becoming a bit more of a reality that I was actually doing some things consistently. And so I ended up doing an internship for 6 months, and I just stayed on for the Timbers Academy for a year. Again, making a really small wage, just basically a stipend that their director was able to hash out for me. And so it was really, I was full-time but part-time, if that makes sense. But I knew it was like, keep your foot in the door, you got to keep working, and then when some sort of opportunity comes up, hopefully again you could take advantage and use these references and contacts you had at the time. And luckily that did what happened. After about a year, I was able to work and move to Houston to work with the Dynamo, as well as a performance company that's called Athlete Training and Health. So I had a dual role with them for 2 years.
Wow. Right on. Well, there's a common theme that occurs with guys in your position that have made it up to professional sports. And that is that always looking to do something, always seeking out positions, whether it's a
Yeah.
paid or unpaid internship or whatever, and you
Yeah.
scratch your way through and you get position after position, and you don't stop, you don't give up, and
Yeah.
and you land yourself eventually in Miami. So did you go from Houston to Miami?
No, there's a few more stops in between. So
Really?
yeah, I was in Houston for 2 years. I was the assistant fitness coach of the first team under Paul Caffrey, which were great. It was a lot, and as well as working on the side with athlete training and health. It's kind of the best of both worlds. And again, it made me know that I truly only want to work in soccer in this field. The private setting, while I can see some of the benefits, it's not necessarily for me, at least at the moment. But it also, I got to work with a range of athletes and people, and it was great. But so being there for 2 years, I got the opportunity to now go to Orlando City to work with their B team. And it's kind of one of those ones, talking with my boss at the time, Paul, who I still to this day respect, and that he's kind of who I hope to achieve to be. Kind of, I love the way he runs things, just the overall way he just manages and works in the sport, and he lives and dies for it. That's who I was hoping to achieve. And kind of through his advice, he knew that's kind of the route I wanted to hopefully go down one day. And so at some point, it's like, he's kind of like sink or swim, like take this opportunity. You still get to be part of an MLS team. You get to work with a second team, but obviously you get to now run the show for the second team. And it was a good opportunity for me at that age. And the head coach of the team at the time, again, Anthony Pulis, who's actually now the coach here. And that's why he's the main reason I'm here in Miami. He's an incredibly smart professional guy who, I knew was going to probably push me and force the best out of me. So it was a good opportunity to go there, as well as the director of performance at the time, and Dave McKay was a really good dude who I had good feelings about after just talking on the interview. So it made sense to, again, just continually put myself in a new environment. And it's one thing I still didn't realize at the time then, but now sometimes it made it look great to always move to these new environments after all these every few years. But in some sense for me, it's been great because you go to these environments and you get to kind of rediscover yourself. You push away the things you don't like. You get to put in a new place, new personalities, new cultures. And you can take away so many different things, good and bad, that can again refine your process. And so I spent a year there, and unfortunately, the club decided that they wanted to put the B team on hold and obviously revamp it. And there's been a lot of things going on within the soccer world right now, as you've seen with the MLS Next and MLS Pro initiatives and those sort of things, and some of the teams dropping out of the USL Championship. So they ended up dropping us, and that led me to go to Salt Lake with RSL for the last 4 years prior to this, where my main role again was working with the second team, the Monarchs. So I got to be part of 2 really good years at the beginning, at least from a wins and losses. We obviously won the USL in 2019, and then the club wanted to go down more of a younger developmental route. And then obviously COVID and all that. So it was a hard 2 years in those aspects, but trying to play younger players at a higher level. And the USL is really competitive, so it's difficult. And then at the end of the year, the guy who works for in Orlando gave me a call to talk to me about this opportunity. And again, it made sense. And it was an opportunity to try something new. I loved Salt Lake and a lot of things there, but it felt like a good time to move on and work for a guy who, again, I knew would provide me a new challenge, push me as much as I could ever ask for. And yeah, so then I landed here.
That's a great path. And
it's crazy to talk about when you actually think about it.
No kidding. You mentioned something when we were talking about being with Houston, and then just before you described the rest of the path, you said at that point in time, I realized that I really wanted to it's be with soccer because there's so much about it that I love.
Yeah.
What are those things? Like, what draws you to that particular sport, being an Alaskan who played every other sport but?
Yeah, to be honest, I'm not completely sure. And maybe it's just like the type of athlete that I was. And so for instance, like growing up, I loved Steve Nash. He was kind of like the athlete I kind of idolized. And a lot of it was just the way he would, I guess, outthink situations and how he's one step ahead in all these different ways in open play and the way they ran the pick and roll and all these things. I just love that the mental side of it, and then the free flowing nature. And I felt, again, with the way I was as an athlete when I started to play soccer, it I guess put my best qualities as an athlete. It allowed me to be better on the field. And for instance, like I'm a 5'10", I'm not like 200 pounds. Like I was only going to go so far in American football. In basketball, once again, I was only going to go so far at my height. I'm not like an Isaiah Thomas athletic, like jumping 45 inches. So, in soccer, you can get away with being less athletic than some people by at times, honestly, just like being able to work at a higher capacity, like being willing to go into like a really dark place from like a work rate. And I just love some of those aspects. And there's just so many different ways that the game can be played. And you see the different cultures from whether you're in South America, the Italian, Spanish, the way America's growing, you see these different pockets, like the kind of diversity in the global game that it is. It just makes it so unbelievable to me.
Were you a midfielder?
I ended up playing fullback and striker. Our team was crazy. Yeah, it was weird.
Interesting. Because he just, with Nash being your hero, he was like, he could control the court.
100%.
So, thinking like that.
I wasn't technical enough when I played at that time to be the one to pull the strings, but I was good enough to where, again, because I was athletic, that I understood positioning and foot positioning and how to defend just naturally, again, based on playing basketball and football and baseball and just some of those movements. I just had that athletic ability. And it's probably another reason why I feel really comfortable teaching movement skills and doing some sort of things like that. To just make sense to me, the coordination, and there's just a lot of foot positions, how you just tweak it to fit your sport a little bit. And yeah, I guess it fit when I played in university, at least. Again, we weren't that good, and it wasn't the highest level, but it was still enjoyable.
So with the stuff that you learned in South Wales, technical stuff, tactical stuff, how does that play into your role with Miami now as a performance coach or strength coach?
Yeah, so obviously, like understanding the sport you work in, and kind of if you want to do like the needs analysis from like a textbook standpoint, I think it's useful. But then you start taking a little bit layer further. You can start almost developing individual profiles of specific players, as well as, so for instance, we have a certain style of play we want, and I start understanding from what my coach wants. From a recruitment side, you almost know you're going to probably get a certain athletic profile on some players. Like, for example, like we want our fullbacks to go higher maybe, or we want a forward who can press a lot and make lots of runs to behind, who's a little more athletic. So, as you start to try to train these guys that, okay, I get done in a session and, this guy's at X high speed running. Like if we were in a position where we just sat back and you weren't asking a lot of your forwards, maybe you don't top him up. But if like in a game that he's going to need these demands, like you might need to give him more running at the end of the session, just because, from a capacity standpoint, he needs that in his legs to be able to perform on Saturday for what we want. So, and then you can play that into also a rehab setting. So if I'm bringing someone back, you still kind of have your stages that you do in the different days. But then as you start tweaking it, all of a sudden you start to transfer from like, okay, they've checked XYZ from a physical box standpoint, and you start to put in like more ball work and stuff. You can start making it more positional. So in a sense, like, what are the actions they do? Like, do I need to get a center back to have strikes on goal, or do I need them to hit more diagonal balls because that's what we want? Do I need a striker to actually have finishing or crossing, or do I just need them to sit back and spray balls? Like, what are the specific actions he's going to do? And then make sure he can perform those actions. And then again, you can start to then tweak that based on the injury and the things you need, like whether it's a worst case scenario, or do you just need to like do basic strength, like just build up volume in it. That's where I see the kind of connection between those two.
So injury, that's something to talk about quite a bit. Common injuries, I'm imagining inversion sprains, high hamstring pulls, occasional ACL, and then of course concussion protocols. But are those the majority of what you're talking about?
Hamstring is obviously probably the most prevalent within our sport. You'll see some groin adductor things, I say, is probably the next one, probably. The ankle ones, that's a weird one from a non-contact standpoint. I don't see it that often, at least within my group. I know they happen. I'd say they happen more often based on tackles or contact related issues that sometimes you just can't avoid because guys are going to get slid and kicked and scenarios down that line, right? Concussions can occur for sure.
So what do you do for like the hamstrings and adductor groin, like for returning to sport? What are do you have any specific go-to movements, I won't say protocol because everyone's going to be individualized, right? So, but are there certain things that you're going to do in regards to assessing pelvic motion, close or open chain kind of things? And then based on that information, how does that filter down? You must have kind of like this trickle down logical path to prepare somebody.
Yeah, to an extent, right? So I'd say, I guess you could use like, there's a protocol or like a staged approach, if you will. And then again, it's understanding the injury. So I kind of vary. I mean, you can also look at it from a tactical periodization standpoint, which is typical. You kind of have your strength days, as I like to call it, which are like your XL, decel, change of direction based days. And you have your bigger space velocity days, which are like you play 11s and it's tactical work, but there's also a lot of obviously high speed running and sprinting. And so I'm looking to progress them through that. But then obviously when you start early bucket, we try to screen them once a week. So we have a force frame from Valid Performance. So we test hip adduction and adduction. So like I said, groin squeeze and obviously pushing out, as well as I could call it just a hamstring 90-90. So if they lie supine and their leg is at 90, they're pushing down in their heel. It allows you to kind of see where their hamstrings and groin and abduction are at weekly. And now that device is really flexible. So you can also test based on kind of how creative you are. Again, you can manipulate it, you can rotate it around, you can move in different spots. So if it's a calf, you can have them do almost like a seated calf raise and push down into it, like in plantar flexion. And so I kind of try to start there early on, depending on the injury. So for instance, if it's a hamstring, I'm making sure, can we comfortably do that hamstring 90-90 once, or like in general first? And then also, how's that compared to their average scores, like their kind of original score? And then kind of work back from there and just kind of regularly test that. So for example, if I know I'm going to try to go into, again, let's say it's a hamstring injury, and so they're returning to running, to get through the stage is great. They do their first XL day, which I look at things kind of in the sense of Derek Hansen, and some of his return to play protocols. I really like, just from the thought of like, start short to go long. Like, so can they get up to a certain speed and kind of like these check boxes, and I know they're willing to go the next day, and then I retest the day before in the force frame ideally, so I can see, okay, like, is there improvement in strength? Is the asymmetry within what we want? And do we think then they're ready to maybe actually progress to the main action we're concerned about from a hamstring is probably high speed running and sprinting, at least that first step of it. And then along those ways, within the warm up and kind of like where you call pre-ab or activation and stuff they do like everything's a test in some way. Like they go through different, like whether it's A skipping or B skips, like whatever sort of movement stuff you like, does it look right? Are they feeling it? Okay, if their knee's getting above their hip and they're skipping, like, does it feel normal? Oh, hey, I guess still kind of feels tight or something. Like, okay, cool. Like I'm probably not going to progress you past like a certain range, like until that feels almost normal and it looks normal. So that's kind of the way I guess we go about it at the moment, at least. We're a pretty small staff. I mean, I have an intern that helps out on a part-time basis. We have 2 athletic trainers, but neither are necessarily, they're still very young and learning, and we're obviously trying to teach them all these things. But the field-based stuff, is it something that's typically you learn in a school-based setting, in a university setting? Like that's a lot of hands-on approach, performance-based model too, especially that, say athletic trainers, I think it's great for them to learn. But again, even in like a strength conditioning model, I don't think that's typically taught a lot in schools. I know in my bachelor's degree, it wasn't. I mean, we went through like a personal training course that honestly was like, okay, but like I didn't come out, again, I came out of it in the classic, like I thought I knew everything. I had literally no idea. It wasn't until I obviously got to Wales and I got exposed to being in more of a performance setting with people, and you start to watch things and you start to, okay, like who's good, and you follow things and you start to see these things and you start to ask questions and you go back and like, why wasn't this taught to me in school, where I'm technically supposed to learn these things and all I know is the theoretical application, but I truly don't understand the real way to progress someone through and think critically of it.
Interesting. Yeah, I think that goes true for most certifications as well.
Yeah, 100%.
You learn just the minimal amount to be dangerous, really.
Yeah.
And there's so much more out there to learn outside of the formal settings. You mentioned also
100%.
asymmetries, and there is there is a range or spectrum that, and if I heard you right, where there's an acceptable range,
Yeah.
right? And beyond that, then the likelihood of injury increases dramatically, right? So
Right.
how do you determine that spectrum? How do you determine like the Goldilocks spot in between, not too much
Yeah.
this way, not too much that way?
Yeah.
Is that something you're continually fine tuning? Is it based on sports science? Is it based on feedback? Or is it just based on statistics of injuries? How does that work?
So for me, the first place I try to look is anything obviously evidence based. So you look through literature and what some people that are smarter than me are producing. From what I've typically seen from reading, and again, there's probably a lot more I can read. I believe the acceptable asymmetry that they typically say is about 15%. So that's kind of where I start. And again, through my own just personal experience, anecdotally, I felt pretty comfortable around that range. When you start moving past that, it whether again it's going to injury setting, if it's from like a low response monitoring setting, if someone starts going beyond that, it's you start asking questions, and obviously it's a flagging system. Obviously there's something extreme, then you're like, oh, do I need to do something? But at the same time, I bet there's plenty of guys that sometimes if you didn't test, which for instance, and this is a good example, we didn't get some of this tech in until midway through preseason. So for the first about week or so, I didn't have the force frame to use. So there's things, again, like I'm just going off assumptions. Like I'm watching guys, they look normal, but still training, you're performing fine. And we've had guys that were above 15% in the original testing. We've worked to get that down lower, or even just maybe it was just a one-off, but there was guys that were above it, but they were fine. And there's nothing I would see, even through a heavy preseason in the original days. I was like, oh, wow, I really need to watch him. So like, to be fair, asymmetries are incredibly normal, especially when you watch some guys who are incredibly one-footed. Like, they're pretty fine. Now, is that not something you want to try to improve and get them closer to that range? For sure. But it's the same thing. Like if you look like we don't have a Nord board, but in past, when you look like a Nordic hamstring, like that 330 is like that cutoff that people talk about from an absolute measure where you want to see them. And then you look at like they get to 400 or 500, and you know their risk probably for hamstring injury is very low. Where there's still going to be guys though that could be under 330, which I've seen, and it's still to get through training because there's so many other factors. So it's just like one flag you just have to be aware of. You obviously now, hopefully in that setting, it's like maybe there is some sort of muscular thing that's tight. Can you address that with athletic trainers or physios or whoever you're talking to make them aware so that they're getting treatment? Like if you do like a simple needle wall test, like, okay, their ankle range of motion is less than 10 centimeters. It's fairly restricted. Like, hey, can you guys have a look and see like what this restriction may actually be? Is it like obviously a muscular tissue? Oh, he's got scar tissue built up in the front side. Is that something that we can affect? Like, how can we address this? So it's more just like the informed decisions, and then you try to have conversations, and then you make ideally the best possible decision going forward.
And are you looking for asymmetries in individualized muscles? So the testing is like that, or is it more such as like a closed chain integrative motion, a single leg deadlift, or RDL, or things of that nature, even just a common step up? Are you looking for the asymmetries there, or is it through your force frame?
It's mostly just through the force frame. When it comes like from a gym setting, obviously you're gonna watch when they do lifts. Like for instance, we do single leg RDLs. We'll do step ups at some point during the year, just depending on the variation and progression of our movements. But at the current time, for instance, so we use an application where that kind of has our workouts on it, but in our gym setting, just based on again, we're a smaller club, and the facility we're at, we actually at the current moment, we actually use a rec center because we train at a university. So we literally have students that are part of the university around us lifting. So from trying to actually log some of their weights, it's not logistically possible. So in an ideal world, I'm having them log stuff and I can probably see. But for the most part, unless some guys like, I can only lift X amount on this side compared to this, or I actually identify when I'm watching one of them that one leg, for instance, let's say he's doing a step up and you can see he's clearly pushing through the leg that's on the box going up, and the other one you see him bouncing off the bottom foot of the ground. Like unless you actually spot that, like, and they maybe say something, it's not something I'm to be fair, really, really looking for. Again, I hope, and if I can, I'll address it when I need to, but the most of the asymmetry is going to come from like a force frame type work.
Gotcha. I'm just curious too, because with uh, my kids growing up, soccer was very prevalent, and
Hmm.
I became a youth soccer coach, just like a lot of parents around, right?
Right.
You're
Yeah.
no one else wanted to do it, kind of thing. And hey, you own a
Sure.
gym, why don't you? Yeah, blah. But along the way, FIFA and US soccer combined together to do some licensing of coaching and
Yeah.
became required. Have you gone that path too? Are you FIFA certified
Uh,
or US soccer?
no, I did like the original US like e-license or something.
Uh-huh.
So I started doing my UEFA one obviously when I was in Wales. I completed the C, but I never got an actual certificate. So I went through the coursework. I was starting to do some of the Argentinian courses online. Um, so to be fair, I've obviously been around a lot of coaches, and the main coach I've worked with, they've done a lot of them. So I'm fairly familiar with them, and obviously it costs a lot. I wanted to start doing them when I was at RSL, but the club didn't want to pay for them just because we weren't true technical staff, and they were on a again, and this is fair. They just didn't believe it was something that the fitness coaches should do, at least at the time, and that obviously that can change. But that's a big amount of money for me to spend on it. Not that I don't rate them. It was one of those things that I still feel like I could develop that knowledge and still learn all those things by being in the same room as the guys I'm working with on a day-to-day basis, those coaches, listening to the way they're talking about trainings and analyzing opposition. So I never went down that route. It's kind of the same thing right now in the story here in Miami, that I would have to start at a very beginning license level, like a D license where it's attendant based. And at the moment, it's hard for me to justify potentially missing 1 or 2 weekends of our games for a license that I don't think I'm going to come away with anything,
But
at
so
least at the
what are
current
the
time.
ones that you want to go and pursue? And not necessarily coaching license, but
Yeah.
what are if there's programs, certifications,
Yeah.
licenses, whatever you want to call them, where are your pursuits right now to enhance what you're already doing?
Sure. To be fair, I would like to do the coaching licenses. I just don't want to start the lower ones, which I know is silly. But again, doing like the USC license and B license as well as the UEFA's would be fantastic. But again, just logistically right now, it's just not
Sure.
there. From the performance side, I'm always looking. At the current time, I'd like to go down the functional range conditioning methodology. I'm really curious about that.
Tell me more. Functional range conditioning.
Yeah. So again, I like the hip cars and the pails and rails and a lot of things they do. It makes sense. I just don't know well enough about them because I just haven't been hands on. It seems like there's very fine details you need to understand about how to do them. And the main reason, again, I like them is you're building strength within a very specific range of motion. It kind of, to me, it makes sense from like a side of like, if you're using overcoming isometrics, you're looking at specific joint angles to try to increase that rate coding in, right? So when I look at those and then the sequencing, and so for instance, in a normal day for us, we have what we call activation or prehab. Again, you can label it however you want. It's the right beginning part of the session. And so I try to do that with the theme of the session of what we have. So for instance, if it's a small space day, we're doing like more hip, groin, quad, anterior based stuff. So again, there's progressions on it, but like it might be like reverse Nordics, groin mobility, hip internal rotation, things we know are associated with if you don't have good qualities in those areas, you could have a higher risk of injury for those specific areas, and knowing we're going to overload those in the session. Just like I'm doing a velocity-based day, maybe I'm using like an Askling protocol and doing some other things to the posterior chain. And I like doing some Achilles that's like banded distraction works. Again, again, subjectively from me doing it, I feel better when I do it from a preparation standpoint. I think it helps kind of reset and set my body in a better way. And then like enhancing that by now actually going through movements. And so the sequencing of doing some things like the banded distraction along with some of the FRC stuff, I see some really interesting benefit as well as potentially down the line in the gym. If I'm again having a guy do a trap bar deadlift, or he has history of like knee injuries, or he has like a hip thing, and again maybe it's internal rotation. If I'm doing a specific exercise, can I pair that with something like that to again enhance the movement for him as well as building strength in an area he really needs? And again, sometimes you think something's tight, right, and it's actually just more weak. So
Yeah.
that's where I see some of the potential benefit from the FCR stuff. But again, it's hard to find the time in season to go to a seminar. Online courses are brilliant. Don't get me wrong. I think there's huge benefits to doing those. Like again, like guys like Derek Hanson's Acceleration One was brilliant. So there's all kinds of stuff out there, right? And then you can watch or listen or look at different programs, but it's in season from at least my side, it can be difficult to try to go and find a certification and one of the free weekends you get in a 34 game season that lasts 10 months to hopefully line up correctly, unfortunately. So, but there's so many resources now that it's crazy.
Yeah, there is a tremendous amount out there.
Yeah.
And so it can almost be stifling because you don't know which way to
100%.
go.
Yeah.
So, yeah, truly. I mean, between all the stuff that's coming out with brain science to just joint mobility, stability, closed chain, open chain, there's tremendous amounts, and everyone has their own particular approach.
100%.
There's 20 different schools of thought when it comes to flexibility training, right? So what gets you up in the morning? What's the thing that really drives you to keep on doing what you're doing?
For me, I just love the grind. And it's silly and maybe cliche. It's that constant thing of you're doing the same thing but a little bit different every day. So like we might run the same exact session, match day -1, but it's still, again, can you make it better? And you're always working towards something. And this is probably why I knew the private industry wasn't for me. Just in that sense, like it was enjoyable to be part of the process with a guy, whether it's in the off season or whatever, but then he's gone and like you enjoy seeing success away from you. But being part of that team and that family and you're working towards that common goal and like ultimately again, you're trying to win and compete. And at the end of the day, I'm a competitor, like, and that's truly what it is. So it's doing right by my guys and my staff and, doing as much we can. So when we come on Saturday and we have our match that we walk away hopefully with 3 points and it gets us into the next step, which is, the playoffs and then ultimately a championship. And, being part of 2019 when the Monarchs won it, there's nothing like it. And it's that little bit of taste. And again, for me, you just want to go back and do it again and again. And just being part of that grind every single day, it hasn't gotten old. And it's funny to think I'm almost getting on to the point where now, if you include internships, it's been almost a decade being in pro soccer, which is crazy to think about getting into it when I was 24. But there hasn't been a day where I've really, truly questioned it. There's been obviously the hard days and sometimes you do it, but when you get to be in a setting like this and it doesn't get much better.
Yeah, especially in a place like Miami. I mean,
I
gotta say, Ryan, I'm wondering, do you have a culture shock from growing up in Alaska to being in Miami right now?
If I'm honest, not really. And I don't know, like maybe that's just me. And I guess I'd like to say I'm a pretty flexible and adaptable person. And if anything, I actually enjoy the diversity more.
Do you miss the snow?
Not at all. Not at all. Like snow is awesome to use. Like you're going out snowboarding or snow machining, like brilliant. Day to day, it's horrendous. It's just inconvenient. Like I can't go out and do anything. I just like, I'm gonna stay inside again.
Yeah, well, it develops an amazing work ethic, I imagine.
Yeah, to some extent. I mean, that's also driven from my parents. They always push that, and I like to believe I'm also very internally motivated, but some of it also just comes from being in the right setting at times. Like there's sometimes settings can wear on you, depending if they're the right culture. Again, I know culture is a big buzzword, but it's one of the reasons again I like to think of a pretty good awareness, and it's why coming here it made a lot of sense. We have a saying like we want to have like a relentless pursuit of excellence. And that's a big culture thing for us here. And it's something that I've always known about my head coach, that he's always reflecting, analyzing. If there's something that we can use or you can do to learn, to know more, like he's always going to like basically flip every stone, right? Like, and that forces me to stay on top of it as well, because there's that motivation of not being left behind, or I'm always doing as much as I can as well in that culture. And when those things become second nature and habits over time, over a course of weeks and months, it's easy to continue. And then you also know at the end of the year, you're not looking back and like, God, I wish I did this or that. And there's not the regrets that you're putting in as much as you can any given day.
Well, it sounds like you've been putting in quite a bit of time, and 10-month season. I mean, the season just got underway. So you're really, by the way, how's Miami doing right now in the standings?
We're 3 games in, we've got 4 points. So it's still really early days. Yeah, no, it's not bad. Have a good game against Colorado Springs coming up in 2-3 days.
Excellent. Well, I can't thank you enough for taking a little time out of your schedule.
I appreciate it.
Come in and chat.
Yeah, no, it's been enjoyable. I appreciate the time and bringing me on, especially because you've had some awesome guests on before. So it's pretty cool to be a part of it.
Well, that's it for another episode of the Zealous Podcast. Thank you, Ryan Thamm and Miami Football Club, coming on and sharing all you're doing in terms of performance and coaching with your players and the team. Don't forget, follow us on Instagram, Rocky_Snyder. And you can always catch us on Facebook and the YouTube channel. If you happen to be listening, don't forget, subscribe to our YouTube channel as well, so you can get a whole bunch of video content that I put out aside from the podcast. We'll see you next week.